I think Iqbal announces that he is not a poet, and he is using poetry only as a vehicle to express his ideas. You see, here we have naturally to understand what do we mean by poetry, and whether poetry in the nature of what you call poetry with a message or prophetic poetry can be placed in the category of poetry or not. You see, there is always, except using the term of literary critics. Literary critics have defined what poetry, genuine poetry is, and I may not go into the details of their viewpoint, but I could say, for example, poetry is ghalib, despite the fact that, of course, ghalib, you can trace some philosophy in it too, but nevertheless that is poetry, ghalib's poetry or Mir's poetry. Now, Iqbal is not a poet in that context. He is not expressing the difficulties which human beings have to face for being humans, the challenges which you have to face. And in this sense, poetry of Iqbal, or I would say for that purpose even of Maulana Rumi, this is a kind of poetry with a message. Now, when a poetry starts preaching, it ceases to be poetry, because poetry is not supposed, it's a reflection of your own failures, your own sentiments, your own emotions. But if you are putting across emotions and your sentiments in such a manner through which you are giving a message or a pagham, then of course it's prophetic. It's prophetic poetry, and it is not really poetry in the strict sense of the term. Now, Iqbal's poetry is not like that, the poetry which gives your emotions and enumerates your failures and how sad it is to be human. But here on the other side, it is he is provoking you, and he tells you what you should aspire for and what you should reach at. So that's why he also considers Rumi as his Imam or as his Piru Murshid, because Rumi is one of such examples in Islamic literature where poetry is prophetic. Now, in this sense, Iqbal is correct when he says, I am not a poet, and I am using poetry as a vehicle to express my views. I want to bring these views for you to understand, for the people to understand. And what is his message? His message is of awakening, of a dead people, a dead civilization. So he is only trying to wake you up, and therefore he has a purpose, and that is the reason why he is not a poet, because a poet doesn't or shouldn't have any purpose. Should I proceed? Iqbal is essentially a religious poet who expresses the religious aspirations of his age in such a way that it is difficult to enter into the spirit or grasp the significance of his great poems without some acquaintance with the theology and cultural history of Islam. The same is true also of T.S. Eliot, who cannot be comprehended fully unless and until one is familiar with the religio-cultural tradition to which he belongs. Iqbal is a poet gifted with the necessity of utterance. This is something very important. Gifted with the necessity of utterance. He carries, as it were, the prophet's burden. The message he is to deliver is pressed like lead upon his soul, and although the process of telling is an agony, he must tell it, and he suffered from this agony throughout his life. Each word of the message is like a flame which struggles to break forth into speech and will accept no suppression or denial. Such poet prophets may belong to different religio-cultural traditions. Nevertheless, they exert fascination over others because it is laid upon them to deliver the message. I have used the expression message here in the same sense as you had earlier expressed wisdom or visionary poetry. There is no denying the fact that poetry can be vigorous and strong while quite indifferent to religion. But poetry cannot long remain separated from religious consciousness if it is to achieve a higher level of expression. Therefore, the bond between religion and poetry is not superficial or accidental. Religion is a power as ancient as the world, and if philosophy, the parent of the sciences, has been universally acknowledged as the child of religion, there is no reason why poetry, which in its higher form is more philosophical than philosophy itself, should not be considered as the child of religion. I don't know कि उस ज़माने में मैंने ये किस तरह लिख दिया है और ये वाकई हकीकत है. I would say that Iqbal in this respect was really unusual, and he was remarkable as a citizen of many worlds, taking both the East and the West in his stride, carrying his readers across times, countries, cultures, languages, raising above boundaries and specifications, transcending the confines of limiting perspectives, opening on to genuine, I would say opening on to a genuine universality. Well, he of course knew Urdu, he knew Sanskrit, he also of course knew Persian, he also was aware of Arabic, and at the same time of course he spoke Punjabi, besides being of course very well versed in English.
And German.
And German of course.